Welcome back. In part 1, I explained the proper interpretation of the two time periods of 430 years and 400 years. Both are connected with the nation of Israel. Both have caused significant problems for many people because of the common assumption that they both state how many years the people of Israel were slaves in Egypt before the Exodus. I showed how neither prophecy is specific to that event. The 430 years, which is found in Exodus 12, began at the point when God instructed Abraham to leave his home and to enter the land he promised to his descendants. 215 years later, Jacob moves his entire family to Egypt. They spend the next 215 years there until this now great nation exits from Egypt, a total period of exactly 430 years. The 400 years prophesied in Genesis 15 states that it is specifically for the offspring of Abraham. God tells Abraham that he will live in peace until his death. At that point, his descendants would experience periods of affliction and slavery over the following 400 years before they again returned to the same place where Abraham was currently living. When Abraham died, Isaac settled elsewhere in the land. And during the following years, Jacob moved his entire family to Egypt. They left after many years of slavery, and they wandered in the wilderness until they finally entered into the Promised Land. Then they returned to the place where God had spoken the prophecy to Abraham. At that point, they conquered Jerusalem and enslaved the Amorites. This was exactly 400 years when the entire prophecy was fulfilled. As we worked through this investigation, we ended up with a timeline of events. This began with the death of Terah, Abraham's father. It includes when Abraham entered the land, his death, the birth of Isaac, the birth of Jacob, when Jacob moved his family into Egypt, time spent in Egypt, the exodus from Egypt, the wandering in the wilderness, and the entry into the Promised Land, and finally the conquering of Jerusalem. All of this was done using the information contained within the biblical text itself. But in exactly which years did these events happen? When was the exodus from Egypt? Many people have tried to figure this out, and there are many theories. In this presentation, I will suggest an answer, one that is closer to the actual date than I think anyone has given before, at least from what I have researched. You might be surprised to find out that the required information is also in the Bible itself. Now, to prepare you, the date I suggest will not match with the majority of accepted theories. I won't spend time pointing out each of the flaws with all the other proposals and where they got things wrong. But in general, the major problem is that scholars rely on comparing synchronisms between various cultures when they construct their timeline of history. It's often their best guess where to slot things together. This is especially problematic when they try to match with the historical record of eclipses. Modern computations of when eclipses happened in the past cannot be relied on before about 709 BC, when the length of the year and the length of the lunar cycle changed. This is recorded in the Bible when God gave King Hezekiah a sign and modified the orbits suddenly and permanently. As a result, the 360-day year changed into our current 365-and-a-quarter-day year. There is evidence that many cultures were forced to add 5 additional days to their calendar after this time. However, this needs to be fully explained in a future video. In any case, there are significant issues with the majority of current theories of historical dates. So it is very understandable why the Exodus date that I will suggest will not have been known before. This presentation will continue to use the information found in the biblical text. I prefer to present the accurate information. It's like those who can recognize counterfeit money. We need to spend most of our time investigating what is authentic. So, we have constructed a series of anchor points, which are events relative to each other. What we need is some anchor point which can be tied to a historically confirmed date in our modern calendar. Currently, no archaeological date has been scientifically agreed on for any of the biblical events which we have considered so far. Let's continue to examine the dates in the biblical text. Will we come to some event that does have confirmed archaeological evidence supporting it? Now, this will continue to be somewhat technical. However, as I showed in part 1, this is necessary in order to examine all the various specific details and to understand these things correctly. Let's put our puzzle-solving hats on. In 1 Kings 6 verse 1 it says, "In the 480th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord." Starting at the Exodus, and after 479 complete years, Solomon was in his 4th year as king when he started building the temple. Before Solomon became king, David began to reign in Judah first, and then over all of Israel. His entire reign totaled 40 complete years. And the time that David reigned over Israel was 40 years. He reigned 7 years in Hebron and 33 years in Jerusalem. 1 Kings 2 verse 11. I specifically state complete years when talking about the reigns of kings. A king could ascend the throne at any point during a year. However, they only began counting at the start of the next year. The reigns of both David and Solomon require additional years in order to correctly construct the timeline. So, use 480 years from the Exodus, subtract 3 complete years of Solomon's reign. Subtract 1 more year, because the reigns of kings begin at complete years and not overlapping with a previous king. Subtract 40 years of David's reign, and another 1 year because the reign of kings begin in complete years. And this results in 435 years from the Exodus to the start of David's reign. King Solomon was the last king over a unified kingdom of Judah and Israel. The kingdom then split into 2 after his death. The Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel and removed the entire population. The end of the southern kingdom of Judah took place when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, destroyed the temple and the city of Jerusalem and exiled the population into the Babylonian Empire. Ezekiel records this. In the 12th year of our exile, in the 10th month, on the 5th day of the month, a fugitive from Jerusalem came to me and said, "The city has been struck down." Ezekiel 32:21. Years before, God had removed himself from the temple built by Solomon in Jerusalem. We find this in Ezekiel 8 verse 1. In the 6th year, in the 6th month, on the 5th day of the month, then the glory of the Lord went out from the threshold of the house and stood over the cherubim. Ezekiel 10:18. For this investigation, it doesn't matter what Ezekiel was using to start his dates from. We are only interested in the time difference. So this was 12.8 years minus 6.5 years, which is a 6-year interval. The year before, God had called Ezekiel and told him to perform an object lesson. He was to lay on his side with a model of Jerusalem in front of him for 390 days. Then he was to lay on his other side for a further 40 days. Each day was to symbolize a year. 390 years for Israel, 40 years for Judah, a total of 430 years. This passage has been a notoriously difficult passage for people to interpret throughout the centuries. As I showed in a previous video where I dealt with this topic, this is actually a prophecy of the number of years of the judgment of the people of Israel until they will be fully restored. It includes a period of sevenfold increase in judgment that Moses prophesied would happen. But it is also a reference to the historical time period of the reigns of kings of both Israel and Judah. It is an amazing example of dual prophecy. The 40 years for Judah represent the years that King David reigned starting in Judah. He was a special king, a man after God's own heart. Then, beginning with Solomon, the next 390 years symbolize the reigns of the subsequent kings till God leaves the temple. The period of the first temple when God inhabited his house in Jerusalem. Both periods together are a total of 430 years. So, now we have a complete timeline from within the Bible itself, from the covenant with Abraham as he entered into the Promised Land until the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. So, let's start with Abraham as he enters the land occupied by Canaanites. After 430 years, Moses leads the Exodus and receives the law of God. Continue for another 435 years to the start of the reign of King David in Judah. Then a further 430 years when God's glory leaves the temple, and 6 more years when the temple and Jerusalem are destroyed. This means a period of 1301 years from Abraham entering the Promised Land to the destruction of Jerusalem. These are complete years. Since the events can happen at different points during a year, this adds or subtracts from some of the periods. So, now that we have a timeline of relative periods between events, the next step is to anchor this to our modern historical record of dates. Then, we can actually apply dates to all the events in order to compare them. But where do we find such an event? Many of the events described in the Bible are considered to be myth by modern archaeologists and scholars. They are contentious even within the Christian research community. However, there is at least one major event that is agreed on by most secular and Christian historians. This is the siege and destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. The destruction of the temple and the burning of the city took place in the summer 586 BC. Official records of the reign of the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar have been discovered and translated. Although they are primarily from the beginning of his reign, they prove that he existed as a person and had that position during that point in history. The timing of the subsequent siege and destruction of Jerusalem has been extrapolated from the information contained within the Bible. That is, until recently. Over the past several years, a major archaeological discovery has taken place in the area of the old city of David in Jerusalem. While reconstructing a parking lot, an ancient structure was uncovered, which had been built with expensive materials. The floor had been laid with flat, cut stone. The roof had been held up with massive wooden beams. The entire structure had suffered complete destruction from a massive fire. Archaeologists proposed that it was burned during the time of Nebuchadnezzar's razing of Jerusalem. Scientists then examined many of the remaining paving stones using a new method of archaeological dating. They determined the magnetic field of each stone and compared it with the changes of Earth's magnetic field throughout the historical record. This method recognized that when stone and pottery are heated to a certain high temperature in fires, they take on the properties of the magnetic field of Earth at that point in time. This can then be examined and compared with the other objects of confirmed dates and magnetic field properties. But when examining pottery, the dates that result do not indicate their initial age, since they were used in cooking and heated up multiple times. However, during a major destruction event by fire, the results can be very accurately known, since it was only a single heat event. The study provided them with a date of 586 BC, which matches the recorded information in the Bible for the destruction of Jerusalem, and the information gleaned from the official record tablets of Babylon. So let's assign 586 BC as this anchor date, and examine where the other relative events fall. As a reminder, our goal is to determine the year of the Exodus. So starting with 586 BC, when the temple and Jerusalem are destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, we go back 6 years. We land on 592 BC, when God's glory leaves the temple. Moving back a further 430 years, ends up at 1022 BC, when David begins his reign of 40 years as king. Going back a further 435 years, lands us on 1457 BC, the Exodus from Egypt and the giving of the law. Going back a further 430 years, and that leaves us in 1887 BC, when God calls Abraham and he enters the Promised Land. We now have the date 1457 BC as the year of the Exodus. Note that this does not match with the majority of archaeologists' theories. Neither does it match with the theories of most well-known Christian scholars. However, this result has been obtained by carefully examining the various details contained within the Bible, and it has been interpreted by taking into account things which many just overlook and ignore. Using the date of 586 BC for the destruction of Jerusalem has provided us with an anchor point from our modern era. Are there additional methods that can be used in order to confirm this very unique 1457 BC result? After all, this does not match with other dates put forward by consensus. As part of the investigation in the previous video of the 430 years, we constructed a timeline that began with Terah, Abraham's father. The first major genealogy in Genesis ends with the death of Terah. Using the information contained within this genealogy, we can go back all the way to the year of creation. Note that this chart is not to scale. It assigns our modern system of dates to all the people in the genealogy using the recorded information of their lifespan and at what age their son was born. Also notice that as part of this investigation, the date of the flood is shown. That date is 2314 BC. We continue back until Adam and the year of creation. Using all the information in the Bible text, the year of creation is revealed to be in 3970 BC. So, if the Exodus did indeed take place in the year 1457 BC, then creation was in the year 3970 BC. The period between 3970 in 1887 BC, which is the covenant given to Abraham, is 2083 years. Add that additional 430 years for the year of the Exodus, that is 2,513 years. So from creation, 3,970 BC, plus 2,513 years, that leaves us at 1457 BC for the Exodus. Exodus 23:10-11 says, "For 6 years you shall sow your land, and gather in its yield. But the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field may eat. You shall do likewise with your vineyard, and with your olive orchard." Now, if you will recall the narrative of the Israelites at Mount Sinai and the giving of the law, God instituted the Sabbatical year cycle for Israel during this time. For 6 years, they were to plant their crops, but during the entire 7th year, they were not to plant, but to eat of the natural harvest of the untilled fields. The cycle was to be observed throughout all future generations. This took place 3 months after the Exodus during the same year. Since this sabbatical cycle was so important that God said all future generations should observe this, was this cycle also in existence all the way back to the creation? The very first year of human history? The Bible does not specifically mention this. However, Noah did have knowledge of which animals were clean and which were unclean when he took them into the ark and when he later made sacrifices to God. Genesis 7:8-9 tells us, "Of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds, and of everything that creeps on the ground, 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah, as God commanded Noah." It seems some elements of the law of God were known before the law was given to the Israelites in Mount Sinai. So it is very possible that the sabbatical cycle of years was known as well. Just the very fact that the creation week consists of 7 days already implies there was something very special about the cycle of 7. And we can almost be certain of this by examining the number of sabbatical cycles between creation and the Exodus. Remember, the Exodus occurred in year 1 of a new 7-year cycle. So there were 2,513 years between creation and the Exodus. Divide that by 7 years in every sabbatical cycle, and you get 359 complete sabbatical cycles. Amazing. The year of creation was also the first year of a new 7-year cycle. 359 cycles of 7 years occurred between creation and the Exodus. In case you have not appreciated this discovery, if this did not work out evenly, then it would mean that 1457 BC, as the year of the Exodus, could not be the correct year. There are 2 additional potential confirmations of the 1457 BC Exodus year. The first is the narrative of King Hezekiah. The Bible does not contain specific information as to which years were sabbatical years. However, this particular event strongly suggests one. Starting with Isaiah 36:1. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. Then Isaiah the son of Amos sent to Hezekiah, saying, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, because you have prayed to me concerning Sennacherib, king of Assyria, and this shall be a sign for you, this year you shall eat what grows of itself, and in the 2nd year what springs from that. Then in the 3rd year sow and reap, and plant vineyards, and eat their fruit. Isaiah 37:21 and 30. Throughout most of the kingdom period of Judah and Israel, people did not follow the law of God. That included the sabbatical year cycles. As Jeremiah states, one of the byproducts of the Babylonian exile was that the land made up for all the sabbatical years that they had missed. God's answer to King Hezekiah's prayer occurred during a year which was very likely a sabbatical year, since they were commanded not to sow, but to eat what God caused to grow from the land. The sign from God was that the year after they should also not sow the land, but depend on what God would cause to grow. So the 14th year of King Hezekiah's reign was a sabbatical year. Using the records of the reigns of kings of both Israel and Judah, the year can be determined to be 709 BC, the 7th year of a sabbatical cycle. Now, moving forward 1 year in 708 BC would be the first year of the next cycle. Subtract 3970 BC, which was the creation year, and that gives us a difference of 3,262 years. Now take these 3,262 years and divide by 7 years in every sabbatical cycle, and that gives us 466 complete sabbatical year cycles. We see that the connection from Exodus year 1457 BC back to the creation year 3970 BC leads us to a later confirmation during the time of King Hezekiah. Secondly, Josephus, the historian, includes information about the rule of King Herod, which allows us to determine a particular sabbatical year. According to Josephus, Herod ruled for 37 years, 34 of them after capturing Jerusalem. They persisted in this war to the very last, and this they did while a mighty army lay around them, and while they were distressed by famine and the want of necessaries, for this happened to be a sabbatic year. This destruction befell the city of Jerusalem when Marcus Agrippa and Caius Gallus were consuls in Rome on the 185th Olympiad, on the 3rd month on the solemnity of the fast. Here we have information that the particular year was 3 months into the 185th Olympiad, which began every 4th July. The first Olympiad occurred in 776 BC. Since the 185th event had just occurred, it was not a complete year. So let's take 184 complete Olympiads and multiply them by 4 years per Olympiad. Add 3 more years because of the current Olympiad, and we end up in 739 years. Now take 776 BC as the year of the first Olympiad and add that 739 years. And that brings us to 37 BC as a sabbatical year. Going forward 1 year to 36 BC, it would be the first year of the next sabbatical cycle. Subtract 3970 BC as the creation year, and that's a difference of 3,934 years. Now take this 3,934 years, divide by 7 years in a sabbatical cycle. That gives us 562 complete sabbatical year cycles. So using all of these various anchor dates, we can be reasonably certain that the year of the Exodus from Egypt occurred in 1457 BC. And this has led us to determine that the year of creation was very likely 3970 BC. Let's take this one surprising step further. There are many who have come to the conclusion that the entirety of human history is made up of one great week, each day consisting of a period of 1,000 years. Therefore, all of time will be contained within 7,000 years. Therefore, we are very likely living during the sixth day, actually at the very end of that day. If we add 6,000 years to the year of creation that we have discovered, this leads us to 2031 AD as the last year of that sixth day. That means 2032 AD could very well be the start of the seventh day, the day of the Lord. The implications of this result is simply astounding. This presentation has led us to some surprising discoveries. We have followed the information contained within the Bible and have allowed the passages to speak for themselves. Once we determined an internally consistent timeline, we could then attach it to a confirmed event within our modern calendar system. Then things fell into place, and some amazing information became visible. The Exodus very likely occurred in 1457 BC. The year of creation was very likely 3970 BC. And we are rapidly approaching the final years of the sixth day and are eagerly awaiting the start of the day of the Lord.